All right, Shabbosai, good morning. Let us begin. Begin by thanking our sponsors for today's Shiur, TALMUD Torah sponsors for the month of Tishrei, Shaindy Avraham Kelman for dedicating all the Shiurim and Drushos this month in memory of their parents, Jack Bennett, for dedicating the Shiurim this month in memory of Givati Brigade First Sergeant Nikolai Rappaport, Dr. Linda Weinberg for dedicating the Shiurim this month in memory of her husband, Dr. Paul Weinberg, Perez Moshe ben Avraham David. Our week of learning sponsors, Avron, Shaan, and Judah Elbaum, in the merit of a Refua Shleima for Ami ben Chaya. We hope that on the day of learning sponsorship, Doug and Gail Stanger, in commemoration of the yahrzeit of Gail's beloved mother, Fruma Bella, Bas Berl Leib v'chanita. We hope that on the merit of our Talmud Torah, the neshamas will have an aliyah, the families a nechama, and all those who require a refua should have one together with Kol Cholei Yisrael. But let's say with that, let us begin. So let's begin. Today's daf is Lamed Dalet, a very exciting daf ahead of us today. We are picking up on Lamed Gimel Lamed Beis 33b, and we are picking up on the bottom of the daf Umegavev Min HaChotzer, which is 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 lines up from the bottom. Umegavev Min HaChotzer. Remember again, the first opinion the Mishnah said that halacha l'maisa, you can go as Rabbi Eliezer, that you could collect splinters of wood from the chotzer, and to go ahead and, because anything that's in the chotzer is considered to go ahead, I should say, his lashon is, umegavev min ha-chotzer umadlik. You can gather wood from the chotzer and use that wood to kindle a fire, because anything that is inside of the chotzer, by definition, is considered to be muchan. So remember again, the Chachamim disagreed. The Chachamim said, megavev mishalafonov umadlik. Remember again, about yesterday's stuff. The Chachamim disagreed on 2 points. They disagreed on the toothpick point, right? And they disagreed on the concept that anything that's in the chutzner is automatically muchan. They held that you could gather whatever wood is right in front of you, right? And you could use it for kindling, not for toothpicks. But just because it's in the chutzner doesn't make it muchan. So it says the Gemara. Let's analyze. Tan Rabbanan megavev min hachatzer matlik shekol ma shebechatzer muchan hu ubilvad shelo ya'aset tziburin. Gemara quotes another Beitzah, and the Beitzah says you can gather up whatever is inside of the chatzar and kindle it, for anything that is inside of the chatzar is considered to be muchan, as long as what? You don't make it into piles. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Shimon Matir, Rabbi Shimon says that Allah l'maisa. So Rabbi Shimon says you can. So what's the machlokes? So interestingly enough, the machlokes over here seems to be not in about gathering wood from the chatzar, but rather about making piles out of that wood. So what's the nature of the machlokes? So So the first opinion holds. The problem with gathering is whenever you gather something, it looks like you're gathering it for long-term use. Right? So a person who sees me gathering wood, even though again it's in my chutzner, they may erroneously think that I am going out and gathering wood for today, for tomorrow, for the next day, and of course then it looks like a problem of hachana. The Gemara says, Umar Savar Kideraso Muchachas Alov. The other opinion says, no, people see that I have a pot of food, that's up. The fact that I have the pot of food up, that ultimately indicates, that's a clear indication that I'm gathering the wood for what purpose? For the purpose of kindling a fire in order to cook for that day of Yom Tov. Good. But say just a side machlokes. Now again, we're going to see that halacha l'maisa, the truth is we reject the view of Rabbi Eliezer in general and accept the view of the Chachamim in this situation, that halacha l'maisa, you can go ahead and collect wood immediately from in front of you. But remember, we also paskin that wood could only be used for hadlaka. Right? We spoke about this on Shabbos and yesterday, that wood could really only be gathered for the purposes of hadlaka. The toothpick issue goes back to the end of yesterday's daf, where we saw the Shulchan Aruch, which spoke about that the only thing pretty much you can make a toothpick out of again is what? Remember? Little chazara, soft animal food, right? Anything that's soft and ultimately again cannot be made into a kli. Good. Says the Gemara. Let's go weiter. So ve'ein motzin asar. Remember again, the Mishnah said that you cannot create fire on Yom Tov. My taima, what's the reason? Mishum de kamolid biyamtiv. Ultimately, again, because it's a problem of nolad. So also we reference this. This is where Rashi, that's why Rashi in the Mishnah quoted this. Right? It's a problem ultimately of creating something on Yom Tiv, the prohibition or the Isser of Nolad. Again, as I pointed out in yesterday's shir, this in and of itself is a machlokes rishonim. Is it Nolad? Is it machshire ochel nafesh? Good. Point over here is you can't create new fire on Yom Tiv. You also can't go ahead, I will say this was the end of the Mishnah, you can't fire up tiles. Malabnin literally means you can't go ahead and make a tile hot on Yom Tiv. So my Kavod, what's wrong with making a tile hot? I will say, just remember again, the way this was introduced in the Mishnah is the Mishnah said, so Mishnah said you can't go ahead and create fire. Then the Mishnah discussed all the different ways one could potentially create fire. Eitzim, avanim, afar, ra'afim, mayim. And then the last part of the Mishnah was ve'im malabnin es hara'afim litzlo span. You cannot go ahead and heat up a tile. Now, why would you be heating up a tile? To roast something on it. So we'll say this goes back. This apparently was also especially useful for fish. We've already seen that the problem with going ahead and roasting fish on a grill-like item was what? Was that the fish gets burned, right? So it seems to what you could also, if you heat up a tile, so the heat is evenly dispersed along, so you could roast things on the tile. So the Mishnah said, you can't heat up a tile in order to roast on it on Yom Tiv. Why can't I heat up a tile? My Kavod. Interesting. What are we talking about over here? New tiles. Now, what's the chap with a new tile? Mipnei shetzarech, top of lamed dalid. Mipnei shetzarech lebadkan. Here's what's interesting. Whenever you have a new tile, so part of the shaila is, will the tile hold up to heat? Right, so there's a heat test. Look at Rashi. First Rashi down Dalef. Tzarach lebatkon im yuchlu lekabel libuna hilchach biyom tivlo dilma paki vishtachach detar shlo tzorach. So we'll say after you go ahead and create the tile, part of the way that you go ahead and you test the tile out is to go ahead and expose it to fire. Now sometimes the tile will crack. So this is actually interesting. What's the problem with using it on Yom Tiv? The problem with using it on Yom Tiv is here's what's interesting. There's nothing inherently wrong with heating up a tile, right? So let's say if you have an old tile that you've been using for years for cooking, you could heat that up and cook on it. The Gemara is saying the Mishnah, when it says you can't heat up a tile, is talking about a new tile. You've never heated it up before. What's the concern? The concern is you're going to heat it up. What's going to happen? It cracks, right? If it cracks and it breaks, it turns out that this was tircha for no reason. Right? That this was tircha, this was effort expended on Yom Tiv for no reason. And again, we try to avoid that whenever possible. Va'amrila, others say, mipnei shetzarech lechasman. Others say the reason you can't fire up a tile is why? Because you have to harden it. Look at Rashi for just a moment. Shetzarech lechasman, lakshosam behesek rishon hemischaskim, umiskashim. Hilchach afa gad l'tzorach Yom Tiv namihu dat solen aleh mihu kevan de behesik zeh naaseh kli aser. Second opinion says that no, the problem with heating up a brand new tile bosai is what? Tikun maneh or makeh bepatish. Right? Essentially, this is, again, remember the tiles were made out of earthenware. So like any earthenware object, the final step in its production is exposing it to intense heat to harden it. Shabbos says, here's what's interesting. So everyone is agreeing that when the Mishnah says you cannot go ahead and heat up a tile, we're talking about new tiles. The shaila is, what are we concerned about? First opinion says sarach lebadkan, because the first opinion says we're concerned that it's going to crack, and if it ends up cracking, it turns out that you've engaged in unnecessary tircha. Second opinion says sarach lechasman, you have to harden it, and therefore again it's like a makeh bepatish tikun kli type of issue. So we'll say, listen to this. This is a fascinating case. So the Gemara says, based on this, Tinan Hasan we learned, the Gemara says, Darsa osha tarfa bakos. Listen to this. You have a bird, a kosher bird, and you trampled the bird accidentally. Osha tarfa bekosa, or you knocked the bird into the wall in a significant way. Osha rata sabehema, or bless you, or an animal trampled the bird. O mifar chesas, but the bird is still alive. The bird is still alive. So the bird has been injured in a very significant, or at least it has suffered an injury that is quite significant, but the bird is still alive. Mifar chesas is still alive. V'shasa me'es la'es, and the bird lives for 24 hours. And then after 24 hours, v'shachta, you shecht the bird. You shecht the bird. What's the halacha? Kshera. Ultimately, again, the bird is kosher. The bird is kosher. Okay. Now, I'm going to say, so now remember, what's happening in this case over here? What's happening is, we see the bird has suffered an injury where there's a possibility that what's happened to the bird, it's a treifa. It's a treifa. It suffered some type of injury from which we'll die. So the Gemara says, the first thing the Gemara says, wait 24 hours. As long as it lives 24 hours and then you perform a proper shechita, the bird is kosher. Now, important qualification. Amr b'Elazar bar Yanai, Mishur b'Elazar ben Antigonus, tzricha bedika. No. It's not enough just to shecht it after 24 hours, but what? After you shecht it, you have to do an internal examination of the animal to make sure that the animal is not a treifa. Look at Rashi for just a moment. Haki Garcin, right across. Amr b'Elazar bar Yanai, Mishur b'Elazar ben Antigonus, tzricha bedika. Mi kisha same es la'es, nami tzricha bedika. Even though the bird lived for 24 hours, right? Even though it passed the 24-hour mark, it still requires an examination after it dies, after it's shechted. Sorry, Shema nishtabru rov tzalosel o nishpora hashedra v'nifsaka chutshala o echad mishar mine treifus v'shiyas demeis leis itzterich deilo shasa afal pi shebadka v'lo matzah simin treifus treifa shezu achas rosei. So the idea over here is as follows. The Gemara now is saying, Rabbi Elazar says, you need both things. You need the bird to live past the 24-hour threshold, because if the animal were to die within 24 hours of the injury, that would be indicative that the injuries rendered it a treifa. But it's not just enough to pass the 24-hour threshold. What else do you need? You need to go ahead and do an internal examination of the animal afterwards to check. Rashi goes through all the different possible treifas, the spinal cord was separate, a whole bunch of different things. So you have to do the internal examination afterwards as well. Good. What does this have to do with us? The boss said, listen to this. Listen to this. Let's say you have this bird that suffered this traumatic injury. And now let's say the 24 hours end. This happened on Erev Yom Tiv. 24 hours end on Yom Tiv itself. Can you go ahead and shecht this bird on Yom Tiv? That's the shaila. So the Gemara says, and what is the shaila? Look at Rashi just a moment. Malo shachta b'Yom Tiv. Mi chayshinan ho'el tzricha b'dika v'syala be'erusa. We'll say, so essentially, because what's the shaila? What's the concern? The concern is, okay, so we know it passed the 24 hours. But now I'm going to shecht it, and what do I have to be concerned about? That what? Maybe I'm going to look inside, it's going to be a treifa. And therefore it turns out that what? That I did an unnecessary act of shechita on Yom Tiv. So I performed a malacha, and it turns out that it was not for ochal nefesh. Granted, it'll be a shogeg, but lamaisa, am I allowed to shecht this bird on Yom Tiv or not? To which the Gemara says, essentially it's a shaila of mi mechaskinan reusa b'Yom Tiv o lo. So we'll say, so the shaila is, do we assume that this animal essentially no longer has a cheskas kashrus or not? So it passed the 24-hour mark. It suffered this traumatic injury. Am I allowed to shecht it on? Look at Rashi. Mi mechaskinan reusa begava mishum chashash isra malacha b'Yom Tiv dilma mishtachach treifa v'nimtza shochta shlo l'tzorech. So we'll say, so here's what's interesting. So the shaila is, do we say that essentially this animal no longer has a real cheskas kashrus, and therefore I shouldn't shecht it on Yom Tiv, because maybe I'll do an act of shechita, it turns out I can't eat it, and halacha myself I've done malacha for no reason. Now Rashi anticipates our question, can't you say this by any animal? Right? Can't you say, why don't you say, again, I will say, whenever you shecht an animal, there's always the possibility that's what? It could be a treifa. So Rashi says over here something very interesting. Rashi says, Bishlama shar behemus, afal gav demachmerinan anavshe, ubadkinon, mihu samchinan aruba, verov behemus einan treifos. So I will say, here's what's interesting. What happens halacha l'maisa, if you went ahead and you shechted an animal and you never checked it for treifas? What's the halacha? Ex post facto. Have you eaten non-kosher animals? No, we have a rove. Right? Rove animals are not treifas. Right? And therefore, again, now, we check regardless, right? We go ahead and we check every animal to make sure that it doesn't have treifas, but that's an extra chumrah that we do. Technically speaking, you could rely on the fact that rove behemoths are ksheris. So that's what allows us, by the way, to shecht on Yom Tiv. Right? Because after all, why don't you have to be concerned that all the time, maybe I'm going to shecht, the animal's going to be a treifa. It turns out I did a ma'aseh shchita, and it was for no purpose. Rove. The problem in the bird case is what? What's the problem in our bird case? Is we've seen the animal has suffered a traumatic injury. Now, granted, the good news is it passed the first threshold, which is what? 24 hours. But still, the shaila is, am I allowed to shech this bird on Yom Tiv? To which the Gemara says, listen to this. Tanina, we learned this in the Mishnah. Ein malabnin es harafim las los bohen. The truth is, we can answer this from our Mishnah. What did the Mishnah say? You cannot go ahead and fire up or expose a brand new tile to heat. Va'avinan ba, my ka'avid. And we said, why can't you do this? So, ultimately, what did the Mishnah say? The Mishnah said you cannot expose a brand new tile to heat on Yom Tiv. Why not? What are we concerned about? Because maybe it's going to break. So we'll say, what do you see from here? You see from here that halacha l'maisa, where there is a real concern about doing malacha for no purpose, we abstain. So you can't fire up, you can't heat up that brand new tile because it'll break. Based on this, you shouldn't be able to shech the bird because there's a real possibility that the bird is a treifa. Amrullah said to him, no. Anan mipnei shetzarech lechasman masanina. No, we hold the second girsa. Our second girsa says, no, the reason you can't fire up the kli, the reason you can't heat up the brand new tile is why? Because that's makeh bepatish, right? That's the final stage of production, or the finishing touch of the tile to harden the tile. But therefore, I will say, according to that girsa, you'd be permitted to go ahead and shech the bird. So I will say, interestingly enough, depending on which girsa you hold by the tile, could have an impact on the bird case. If you hold that you can't heat up the tile because it'll break, that tells you that anytime that there's a real chashash that your action is going to yield no productive result on Yom Tiv, don't do it. So don't heat up the tile, don't shecht the injured bird. But if you hold that the issue of the tile is makeh b'patish, then it could very well be that once the bird passes its 24-hour threshold, then what? It has its cheskes kashrus, and therefore you should be able to shecht it. So I'll say the Gemara ends there. That's it. So I'll say, I'm just saying in this case, salacha l'maisa, what do we do about this bird? It's important to know. So we'll say, listen to this. This is in Siman Taf Tzadik Ches, Sif Ches. So the Shulchan Aruch writes as follows. Of shenidras paraglayim. You have a bird that was trampled. And therefore, v'yish lachush shenis rasku eivarav. So you have to have, there's a real chashash that maybe the bird is a treifa. V'lachim, tzarach shia me'ez lei. So we'll say, so in general, hilchos shchita, or hilchos treifas is, whenever an animal has suffered a traumatic injury, you cannot shecht it within 24 hours. You have to wait to see if it passes the 24-hour window. So the Gemara says, mutter l'shachta b'yom tiv. Incredible. So as long as the animal passed its 24-hour threshold, you are permitted to go ahead and shecht that animal on Yom Tiv. V'lo chayshinon shema yimatzei treifa. And ultimately, again, we are not choshesh that maybe the animal is a treifa. So once it passed the 24-hour threshold, you can go. Now, could it be a treifa? Yeah. Absolutely. In other words, remember, you're going to check it internally afterwards, and it's possible that it'll be a treifa. But what the Shulchan Aruch is saying is, once it passed the 24-hour threshold, halacha l'maisa, its cheskes kashrus has been restored. And the Mishnah Berurah says, "V'lo chayshinan da'afal gav detzarach bedika mikol makom kevan shahaya lamitchila chazaka de kashrus." Once it, so say, the bird had its cheskes kashrus. Derov behemos was ksheros saying mutal shokto de ma'amidin osa becheskes kashrus. So we'll say, listen to halachically what happens over here. The bird, prior to the incident, right? Prior to the incident, what was its chazaka? Cheskes kashrus. It endures the traumatic incident. What happens? loses the cheskas kashrus, how long does it have to wait to regain it? 24 hours. And then what happens after, what happens after 24 hours? Its cheskas kashrus is fully restored. And halacha l'maisa, you could shecht it into. Which I will say, by the way, if you think about it from a hilchos tshuva perspective, is so powerful as well. See, I will say, we all start life with the cheskas kashrus. Everyone starts life with the cheskas kashrus. Then what happens? See, the difference in life is, it's not that someone's trampling upon me. Usually, I trample upon myself. Right? I take my beautiful neshama, unfortunately, and as a result of negative actions, I trample upon my neshama. Shabbos say, what happens after a person tramples on their neshama? Traumatic incident. What do you need? A new day. 24 hours, right? I need a restart. It doesn't take a lifetime to restart, but it takes some time to restart. Uba shemesh v'tar. Day ends, I need a new day. Every single new day brings with it the opportunity to restore my cheskas kashrus. And all I need to do is make it a good day. And if I make it a good day, me'es la'es, 24 hours, you know what you could do within one day, within 24 hours? You could fundamentally restore your cheskas kashrus in its entirety. Now, does that mean everything is fixed and everything is fine? Maybe yes, maybe no. Like the bird. You never know until you introspect. You never know until you look inside. But lemaisa, we sometimes think that we're damaged goods and it's going to take a lifetime to repair all of the damage. Sometimes all you need is to take advantage of the new day. The me'is lays 24 hours, and all it takes is one good day to restore your cheskas kashrus. Incredible Gemara. So we'll say, let's go back to this. That's halacha by the bird. So it says the Gemara, Tanya, echad mevias, we'll say another great case. Echad mevias ha'ar, ve'echad mevias ha'etzim. So we'll listen to this case. This is a whole chevra, a chevra that does malacha together. I don't know what else, but then says, yeah, stays together, whatever, it gets punished together. So the Gemara says, Tanya, the Beitzah says, echad mevias ha'ar. One guy brought the fire. No, we're going to see, by the way, what this means actually is one guy brings the glowing coal. You're going to see why this is important. He brings the fire. The other guy brought the wood. The other guy puts the pot on the fire. The other guy brings the water. The other guy puts the spices in it. And one stirs. We'll say it's happening on Shabbos. If they all do this, kulan chayavin. They're all chayiv. Because they've all done malacha. Vatanya, but we learned, acharon chayiv v'kulan p'turin. But we learned it's only the last guy who's chayiv, and everyone else is pater. Lo kasha, that's not a contradiction. Had the ICR me'ikara, had the ICR levasov. Listen to this. If the first thing they brought was fire, then everyone is chayiv, because everyone's done a ma'isa malacha. If the last thing they brought was fire, then what? The only guy who did something was the guy who brought the fire. So just when we run through that list, the malachos are involved over here is the guy who brought the fire. What did he do? So remember, the Rashi points out he's bringing a coal. What happens when you carry a coal, we'll say? I don't know, but Rashi tells us. Right? When you go and you carry a coal, just the movement fans the coal. That's havara. That's kindling. The guy who brings the wood, he's putting the wood on the fire. Also havara. The guy who puts the pot on the fire, we're not sure what he's doing. We'll come back to that in just a moment. So the guy who goes out and brings the water, bishul, spices, bishul, stirring, bishul, right? Cooking. Good. Shabbos says, so the Gemara says as follows. Bishlama kulu ka'avdi maisa. I understand the malacha that all of these guys did. Ela shofei says hakadera my kavid. What I don't understand is the guy who puts the empty pot on the fire, because that's, if you notice the progression over here, he puts an empty pot on the fire. What did he do? Right? What did he do? So the Gemara says, what are we talking about over here? A brand new earthenware pot. So a brand new earthenware pot. So we'll say, again, what's the final stage of production with any earthenware item? Exposing it to intense heat. So therefore, when he puts the brand new earthenware pot, that's make bepatish, he's going to be chayav for that on Shabbos. Good, and that's the tie into the sugya. Turn Rabbanon. Another interesting case. Tanur v'kirayin chadashim. Let's say if you have a brand new stove or oven, harihen kechola kelim hanitalin b'chatzer. They are like any other utensil which could be moved inside of a chatzer. Now, what does this mean? Take a look at Rashi. Harihen it's the first of the widest lines of Rashi. Harihen kelim hanitalin b'shabis b'chatzer dechazu lemesav begavai humidi. Let's say if you have a stove or an oven that's sitting in the chatzer, they're, of course, on one hand, they're a klisha malachto le'isr because they're used for cooking. But interestingly enough, they have a secondary heter purpose. What's the secondary heter purpose? You can use it as a storage area. So it's actually mamshik a klisha malachto le'isr. So therefore, again, you could use it on Shabbos, sarkufa makomo. Good. So the Gemara says, aval in sachin osan shemen, but you can't smear it with oil. Vein tashnos obamatlis, you can't shine it with a cloth. Vein mafigin osa betzonen kedei lachasman. And I will say, interesting enough, same idea. If it was heated up, you can't pour cold water on it because this solidifies the utensil. So I will say, so the idea over here is, interestingly enough, you could use an empty stove or oven on Shabbos for storage purposes. It's a klisha malachto le'isr. What you can't do is smear it with oil or polish it up with a cloth, because ultimately, again, I will say, these are considered to be makeh b'patish actions. Same idea with pouring cold water over it, right? It's the same idea. How would you go ahead and finish the production of a stove or an oven? After you heated it up, you cool it down, right? So you so you can't do that on Shabbos. Good. But say, again, the only reason all these cases are being brought up is because they all tie back to what? To the tile case. Right? Remember, again, they all tie back to this idea of pouring cold water, or I should say, heating up the tile as a final stage of production. Tan Rabbanon was another interesting case. Molginas harosh v'es haraglayim. So we'll say, this is talking about now you shechted an animal, and remember again, you want to go ahead and prepare the head, or you want to prepare the feet, but you want to get the hair off the head and the feet. So how do you do that? So Rashi says over here, molgin means you could immerse the head or the feet in boiling water. Apparently, this removes the hair. You could also go ahead and scald them in water. You could also singe them in fire. We'll say what you can't do is you can't go ahead and smear it with plaster. Plaster, Rashi says, was used like as a depilatory for hair removal. So you can't go ahead and smear it in plaster. Velo ba'adama, velo b'sid. You can't go ahead and use earth, and you can't use sid, also another type of plaster. Rashi says over here, vein toflin osam b'sid lahasir saran shahari derech ha'avdonin. Now, both say this is very interesting. So here's what's interesting. You could remove the hair from the animal, right? V'harai, you could put it in boiling water, right? You could scald it, you could singe it, but you can't smear it, right? With plaster, with earth. Why not, says Rashi? Because that's the way tanners removed hair from a hide. And that looks like you're engaging in an act of tanning, and ultimately, again, that is going to be aser. Vein goes is in osam isparayim. You also can't go ahead and cut off the hair with scissors. Rashi says over here, because it looks like you're trying to salvage the hair. Then, along those same lines, then goes is in as hayarak petispora shalo. So also it's very interesting. You can't go ahead and cut off the extra leaves of vegetables with vegetable scissors. They used to have vegetable scissors. Or maybe they still have vegetable scissors. What are vegetable scissors used for? I will say now, primarily what they're used for is to actually detach the vegetable from the ground. So shears, like vegetable shears. So you can't use the shears. Now, I will say, you can't use the shears to cut off like the dead leaves or excess growth from the vegetables. Why not? Because the concern is if you use those shears on Yom Tov, what does it look like? You detached the vegetable from the ground on Yom Tov. Now, you're not allowed to detach vegetables from the ground on Yom Tov. The malacha of kotzer is a malacha that you cannot do on Yom Tov, even for ochal nefesh purposes. There's a whole discussion exactly why that is. Either because it could have been done by far Yom Tov with the same results, or because katsira is a large-scale malacha. And in general, large-scale malachas are not permitted on Yom Tov itself. So halacha l'maaseh, the Mishnah says, you want to cut off some of the excess leaves, that's fine, but you cannot go ahead and use use the vegetable shears. So the Gemara says, Avam taknin es hakundus ves hakavios. So Rabbi said, what we can do is, you could prepare kundus and akavios. What are kundus and akavios? Rashi says, Mini Yerako saying, sheish tarpet dikunan. Gemara doesn't explain what type of vegetables these are, but these are apparently vegetables which require a very significant preparation process. Okay? So the Gemara says, Umasikin va'ofen b'purni, and you could go ahead and use a furni oven. Rashi says over here that a furni oven is mhein tanur shalom agdolim upiem b'tzidam v'lo chashirin letircha. Both say a furni is a large oven. So as opposed to a tanur, which is a smaller oven, right? The forni is so what's the idea over here? So when would you use the forni? If you are having a lot of company. So even though it looks like you're doing a lot of cooking, because you need it, ultimately is permitted. You could warm up water in the antichi. But you cannot go ahead and use the new forni oven, shema tifchas, because ultimately, again, we are concerned that what? That it may come to go ahead and break. Okay, good about say just a list of halachas. Beautiful. Vaitu, Tarabanan. Ein nofchin b'mafuach. So what's the interesting case? You cannot go ahead and fan a fire with bellows. Right? You know, bellows, it's the air thing. Right, the air thing. You cannot go ahead and fan a fire. Now, what's the problem with that? Look at Rashi. Because we'll say, interestingly enough, most people do not use bellows in their own home. Usually, where do you find the use of bellows? By an uman, right, in some type of workplace. We'll say, you see this incredible line that Chazal are trying to straddle. That on one hand, the Torah allows ochal nefesh, but yet to be so careful to not allow ochal nefesh to resemble any type of commercial activity. So Chazal step, I will say, so again, you're cooking. Is there a problem to fan your fire when you're cooking? Is there a problem to fan the fire? No. No problem to fan the fire. But yet, the Mishnah says, but don't fan the fire in a way that looks like you're engaging in commercial activity. The use of the bellows. The Gemara says, Aval nofchin bishfal feres. You could blow, right, you could fan it with a tube. Okay? Ve'in metaknes hashipud. If a spit broke, you can't fix it on Yom Tiv. Rashi says over here, ve'in metaknes hashipud. Udelok Rabbi Yehuda, So I'll go with the second approach. The Rashi says it could be we're talking about a spit that was broken on Erev Yom Tiv, could have been fixed on Erev Yom Tiv already, but you failed to do so. Ve'ein mechadedin also, you can't sharpen a spit on Yom Tiv. You cannot go ahead and split a reed open in order to roast on it. So we'll say this goes back to something we learned before. Rashi points out over here, Ve'in mefatzin es hakana, lo sis krom yusaf tachas hamaliach ala askela sha'osekli dechomidi da'avadishtamish bo havitikun kli. We'll say this was back to the fish case. Right? I don't want to roast the fish on a grill because the fish will get burned. So what would you do? You would take a broken piece of pottery or split open a reed, put the fish on the reed, put the reed on the fire, and therefore the fish cooks evenly. Right? So the idea is opening up a reed, splitting open a reed, and making a kli is problematic. It's osekli. It's osekli. You're making a kli on Yom Tiv. Good. Avam mefatzin es ha'egos b'matlis, but also you could take, let's say, a nut wrapped up, or a bunch of nuts wrapped up in a cloth, and crack it like that. Ve'in choshishin shema tikra. And we are not concerned that you may come to go ahead and tear the cloth. So we'll say with this, if you can imagine for just a moment, you take a bunch of nuts, you wrap them up like in a cloth, like a cloth napkin or a handkerchief, and you want to smash it down and crack the nuts like that. So the Gemara says you're allowed to do that, and we are not concerned that you will come to rip the kli, that you will come to rip the cloth. Rashi says very interesting, ve'in choshish shema tikra, afilu nikres, because even if it tears, lo ichpas, no, we don't care, de'ein ze korea al minas litfar. Plus, we learned this a little bit in Smichas Chavra as well, because halacha l'maisa, the only time that korea is problematic is when? Is halacha l'maisa, when it's tearing with the intention to go ahead and sew. Right? We learned that from where? from the Mishkan, the Malach of Korea. Remember again, it was by the Yerios, by the curtains. When would they tear? When there was a hole in it, they would make a larger tear so that they could sew it up more evenly. But there's also a great case with the cloth, because it's the Minchas Chinuch says the Malach of Korea only applies to what? The Chazara? Soft materials. Excellent. And again, so that's why the case, so even if the cloth ends up ripping, that's not called Korea. Beautiful. Bosei brings to an end that sugya. Mishnah. Va'od Amar Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer also said, Omer Adam al hamuktzeh. Omer Adam al hamuktzeh. Erev Shabbos b'shvius. Great case. A person stands by his muktzeh. Now we'll say, now what's the muktzeh in this particular case? So remember, Rashi says over here, we could just go. So we're talking about, imagine the following situation. You spread out dates on your rooftop to dry out. That's the case of muktzeh that we're talking about over here. Now, interestingly enough, the way it works with the drying out of fruit, at least of dates, as the Gemara explains, is there's a certain period of time where they're inedible. Right? So now, here's what's happening over here. I spread out my dates on Erev Shabbos. And I say, and you're going to see, by the way, the reason, let's take a look. The Mishnah is setting this up as Erev Shabbos during a Shemitah year. Which is great. Right? Why Erev Shabbos in a Shemitah year? Rashi says, top Rashi Namadala days. She'ein Meiser nohig ba. We'll say, remember again, Meiser, right? The halachos of Meiser, Trumas Meisers don't apply during Shemitah. Why not? Everything is hefker. Right? Remember again, Trumas Meisers is only a din by produce that you own. During Shemitah year, everything is hefker. So therefore, watch this. Shein meiser noigba ve'in mechusar ela hazmana v'adin b'meusar u'b'shar shani shavua ela archa demilsa nakit tistam muktzah lav meusarhu the grogros v'tzimukim hein stam muktzah ve'in regilan la'asa kodin aralachta. So we'll say Rashi just points out over here. You're going to see the reason we're setting this up as a Shemitah year is because we don't want to deal with the issues of taking Trumas and Meisros on Shabbos. Right? The truth is, Rashi says you could also set this up as a case of fruit which was already tithed. Right? But Rashi says the reason why that's not such a Shayach case is because generally when would people tithe their produce? Only when? Once it was fully finished. Because you're talking about a case where the fruit that was spread out to dry, that means it's not fully finished yet. So that's why the Mishnah sets this up as a case where I'm standing by my muktzeh. Muktzeh, remember again, in this case means the fruit that's spread out to dry on Erev Shabbos, which is a Shemitah year. So therefore there's no issues of Trumas and Maestros over here. So watch this. I'm standing by my fruit and what do I say? Va'omer, mikanani ochel amachar. And I make the declaration, I'm going to eat of this fruit tomorrow. And I identify, I'm going to eat of this fruit. Rashi says, Mikanani ochal amachar, v'sagi bahachi diyesh breira. So we'll say, remember, this is the position of Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer says, all you need to do is make a declaration that says, I'm going to eat from some of this fruit tomorrow. Do you have to identify which fruit you're eating from? No, because Rabbi Eliezer holds, Rabbi holds islay breira. He holds a breira, retroactive clarification. So tomorrow when I eat from the fruit, it turns out that it's retroactively clarified that the fruit I eat from, I end up eating from, was the fruit I identified on Erev Yom Tiv. V'cham decham say, ad she'yir shom v'yomar mikan ve'ad kan. The Chachamim agree in principle that you could stand on Erev Shabbos by the muktzeh on an Erev Shabbos of a Shemitah year and say, from here I'm going to eat tomorrow. So you could prepare the fruit you're going to eat. But according to Chachamim, you can't rely on breira. You have to actively identify the actual fruits you are going to eat from. Good. So we'll say, let's go back. It says, the Gemara Tanan Hasam, great case. Tinokos shetamnu te'inim erev Shabbos v'shachachu v'lo asru. So we'll say, listen to the case. Children, we'll see why the Gemara is pointing this out with children who went ahead and took figs. They will say in this case, we're talking about fully developed fruits already. So they took figs, and they took figs on Erev Shabbos. They hid the figs. Right? The kids, they hid the figs. Because they said, you know what, we're going to eat from it on Shabbos. So they hid it. V'shachachu v'lo asu. And they forgot, and they did not go ahead and take Trumas and Maestros from the figs. What's the halacha? L'matzi Shabbos lo yochlu ele imkein asru. On Matzi Shabbos, they cannot eat from the figs unless they first go ahead and take meiser. Now look at Rashi for just a moment. Rashi says, Tinoko shetamnu basada o begina lachila Shabbos v'shachlu v'lo asru lo yochlu v'af agav d'karmelan ena tavu mischai b'meiser la'ochlu achila sarai. Actually, we're not supposed to say, there's a number of things that is happening over here. In general, you only have to take trumas and meisers from produce when it's fully processed, and also when it's coming to the home. When it's coming to the home. Now, so that's what you need, right? Fully processed and what we call re'iyas pnei habayis. Ultimately comes into the home. Or pnei hachatzar, comes into your chatzar as well. Now I will say, which means that even if you have fully processed produce, but it has not yet come into your home, you could eat achila sarai. You could snack from it, even though it hasn't been tithed, but you cannot eat achilas keva. You cannot eat a full meal from it. Now, here's what's fascinating. However, anything you eat on Shabbos has the status of achilas keva, has the status of a meal, not of a snack. Therefore, on Shabbos, whatever you would have to eat on Shabbos would have to be tithed. Now remember, can you tithe on Shabbos? No. Which means that if you have fully processed produce on Erev Shabbos, even though it has not yet come into your home, you know you're going to eat of it on Shabbos, even though for you it's a snack. There's no snacking on Shabbos. It's all achilas keva. You would have to make sure to tithe it before Shabbos. Okay, so now watch. So the case over here, I will say, is you have children, and the reason Rashi says we choose children is to show that their das also has impact regarding Trumas Meiser. So listen to the case. The case over here is kids took figs on Erev Shabbos. These figs did not have re'iyas pnei habayis, right? They did not yet come into the home, which means that they were not yet technically chayiv in Trumas Meiser. But the kids had kavana to eat it on Shabbos. And because they were going to eat it on Shabbos, therefore what? That generates a chiyuv for Trumas Meiser. They didn't eat it on Shabbos. What does the Beitzah say? Even though they didn't eat it on Shabbos, if they want to eat it Matzeh Shabbos, what has to happen? They have to tithe it. Even though what? There was not yet a re'iyas pnei habayis. The kavana to eat it on Shabbos essentially generates the obligation to go ahead and take Trumas and Meisros. Incredible. Utnanami, also you can see, I said that's all of Rashi. Utnanami, we learned, Hama'avir te'inim bechatzero, Liktzos banav ubnei beis. I'm sorry, liktzos. If a person went ahead and spread out te'enim in his home, right in his chatzar, to go ahead and dry them out. Rashi says liktzos is liyavshon, v'latzos mehem ketzios, ula'achar shenasu ketzios darsan bi'igo. So also, see the idea over here is you want to go ahead and spread out figs in your chatzar to dry out, because you want to put dried figs. You want to then press them into a cake of dried figs. Ultimately, what happens, Rabbi saying? So because they're in the chutzner, see, even though they're in the chutzner now, but they're not finished, because they're not fully processed, therefore what? You're permitted to eat from them achilas arai, a snack. So there's three core pieces of information over here. In order for produce to go ahead and become chayiv in Trumas Meisos, what has to happen? Two primary things. Fully processed and re'iyas pnei habayis. The exception to this rule is Shabbos. Now, which means if you have fully processed produce and you want to eat it on Shabbos, you can't eat it unless it's tithed. There hasn't been re'iyas pnei habayis. Remember, Shabbos essentially says that anything you eat on Shabbos is achilas keva and not achilas arai. It's not a snack, and therefore by definition requires Trumas Meiser. So boy meaning, Rava and Rav Nachman, listen to this. Shabbos, ma'oshe tekava moktzela meiser, bedavar shlo nigmara malachto. Wow. Both say, what happens if you have a food item on Shabbos that's not fully processed? It's not fully processed. So now, I want to partake of it on Shabbos. Does Shabbos make it subject to Trumas and Meiser, even though what? It's not yet fully processed. Mi amrinon kevan dichsiv karasa l'Shabbos oneg. Since the pasuk says you will call the Shabbos an oneg, which I will say effectively teaches us. Look at Rashi. Because Shabbos oneg. Rashi says kevan deikri achila didei oneg kava she'in ba'o shimarai. Since we say that every act of consumption on Shabbos is a maisa oneg, is a Maisa Oneg, is an act of enjoyment. Therefore, on Shabbos, every single act of consumption has the status of Achilas Keva and not Achilas Arai. It's not a snack, it's a full-blown meal. And therefore, Kava, so therefore, maybe by Shabbos generates a Meiser obligation, even for something that is not yet fully completed. Right? Because we'll see here what's happening over here. Essentially, what the Gemara is suggesting is maybe there's no such thing as snacking on Shabbos. The karasa l'Shabbos oneg, every act of consumption on Shabbos is substantive and significant, which means that every act of consumption on Shabbos has the status of a seuda, of a meal, of achilas keva. And therefore, by definition, you can't eat unless you first take Trumas HaMaasros. O Dilma, B'davar shenigmar malachto kava, B'davar shelo nigmar malachto lo kava. Or perhaps no. As powerful as Shabbos is, Shabbos only has the ability to go ahead and generate an obligation for something that is fully processed. But if it's not fully processed, you cannot go ahead and yet generate the obligation for Trumas HaMaasros. Amarle, Shabbos kova'as bein b'davar shigmar malachto, bein b'davar shelo nigmar malachto. Wow. So Bosa, he responded. Remember again, this is Rava was asking, Nachman responded, the power of Shabbos is Shabbos creates a tithing obligation even if the food is not yet fully processed. Shabbos says, so for example, if you take a fig that you had spread out to dry out, and it's not yet dried out, so the process is not complete. During the week, can you snack from that even though Trumas HaMaasros have not been taken? Can you snack from it? Absolutely. That's the halacha. You can snack, as long as it's not fully processed, you can snack from it. Shabbos, Rav Nachman is suggesting, Shabbos, there's no such thing as a snack. Everything is achilas keva. Everything is a substantive meal. And therefore, halacha l'maisa, you cannot eat from it on Shabbos unless it has been tithed. Which is another way of saying, Shabbos establishes the tithing obligation. I said back, Ve'ema Shabbos to me the chatzar. Maybe not. Maybe Shabbos should be just like the chatzar. How so? Ma chatzar eno kavas ela b'davar shenigmar malachto. Remember we said that under general, right? Hilchas Trumas HaMaasros 101, right? What generates an obligation for Trumas HaMaasros? Only when what? There's a fully processed and riyas pnei chatzar. Rabbi say, if you bring something into your chatzar, but the item is not yet fully processed, does the chatzar generate a meiser obligation on unfully processed foods? No. So I'd say maybe Shabbos like chatzar. Just like chatzar only establishes tithing obligation for something that's nigmar malachto. Af Shabbos lo tikba ela b'davar shigmar malachto. So too again, Shabbos should only generate an obligation for something that is fully processed. Amarle limud arachu biyadenu. No, we have an explicit ruling. What's the explicit ruling that we have? Shabbos kova'as bein b'davar shigmar malachto, bein b'davar shelo nigmar malachto. So he responded, we have a Masorah. This is a Masorah. What's the Masorah? The Masorah, the tradition we have, is that Shabbos establishes a tithing obligation for any type of food you're going to eat, even if the food is not fully processed. Which I will say tells you that Shabbos is even stronger than Chatzar. Because your Chatzar, or even your bias, can only go ahead and generate the tithing obligation upon food that is fully processed. Shabbos is so powerful that halacha l'maaseh, if you are going to partake of a food, even if it's not fully processed, Shabbos itself generates the tithing obligation. I will say again, incredible. Therefore, again, if you wanted to, so first of all, we see two things by Shabbos. Number one, by Shabbos, there's no such thing as a snack. Right? Every single thing you eat on Shabbos has the status of a meal. The karasa l'Shabbos oneg. Every act of consumption, by definition, is oneg. That's number one. Number two, the Gemara says, the Masorah, we'll see if this is the halacha l'maisa, but the Masorah is that halacha l'maisa, Shabbos generates a tithing obligation, even on food that is not fully processed. And I will say, that's absolutely wild. Because in general, Hilchas Trumas HaMaasros 101 is that there is only a tithing obligation upon food that is fully processed has the re'iyas pnei chutz, re'iyas pnei abayis. This is an incredible chiddush. That Shabbos is more powerful than your home. Shabbos is more powerful than your chutzner. Shabbos is more powerful than processing. Whatever you're going to partake of on Shabbos, if you're partaking of it, Shabbos makes it as if it is fully completed and therefore generates a tithing obligation. Rabbi, so we'll stop over here. We'll pick up with the Mir Tzashem, the Armar Zuch, Rav Nachman. We'll finish with this Sugya Mir Tzashem tomorrow and see the Halacha Lamaisa as well. Shkoyach. It seems to be it's a din in Trumas and Maestros, not a din in